I always like to say for entrepreneurs, it's about putting ourselves in the place of most potential. For me, entrepreneurial generation is just incessant curiosity and then taking action to begin to do something. I call it start by starting. Let's be who we are. And the minute we can be vulnerable with who we are and what we're looking to do, the more we're able to connect with people.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Walk to Wealth podcast. If you're tuning in on YouTube or any of the podcast directories, make sure to do yourself a favor and give us a follow because I don't want you to miss any of the amazing guests I have coming on this year. We haven't missed yet, and I don't plan on missing anytime soon. So let's get right into this one. Dave, for anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to get to know you or meet you yet, tell us your elevator pitch. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, hey, John. First off, man, it's awesome to be on this podcast and connecting with you. Really excited to be here, man. My elevator pitch is as follows, man. Lawyer by training, entrepreneur at heart. And all I'm about is how do I sit there and connect with other entrepreneurs and share experiences so we can be the best versions of ourselves. That's what it's all about. And, for me, I really talk about three things, man. And I think life is broken down to three things. Do I show up? Do I open up? And if I do those two things, can I level up, man? And that's what I think a podcast like this really is all about, man. People are showing up, get a chance to open up and be vulnerable, and then it helps us all level up and become the best versions of ourselves. So excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you shared that. And you mentioned sharing your experience, and that's actually, as I said offline, part of the reason why I wanted you on the podcast, because you're someone who's just so down to earth compared to a lot of successful entrepreneur people, right? You're so down to earth. And I was like, when I was first seeing you in my mastermind, I was just like, man, of course what you were saying was valuable, but it's the down to earthness, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, that really made me resonate and connect with you. So I was like, man, I got to reach out to this guy. I got to have him on the show. And now we're here. And this is a perfect segue. As you said, sharing your experiences. So take us back to little Dave. What was life like in your childhood? What was it like growing up? Were you the typical, paper route born entrepreneur, or did you kind of pick it up along the way?
Yeah, that's awesome, John. I think we all have that entrepreneurial gene, man, that manifests itself in so many ways. For me, it really started out, I'd like to call myself like just that kind of always hustling type of guy, always out there figuring out how I could make a buck in some way. And so for me, that manifested itself in shoveling snow, cutting lawns, jobs around, and just trying to figure out how I could, create some value out there and make it happen. And I think really where my entrepreneurial journey really started was kind of when I got to college. I just really was like, wow, I really want to get out there and do some fun things. So my first major entrepreneurial venture where I put capital at risk, where I made some investments that I could lose some money is T-shirts, man. Just like most people when they get started in college, just T-shirts and selling T-shirts. And that was probably the biggest learning that I had, man, was in college. And that's where I scratched my first entrepreneurial itch.
Yeah, that's amazing. It makes me resonate as well with your story because for me, during my time in college, I was in the pandemic. So it was a little bit different, right? The world was kind of shut down a little bit when I was in college. But that's also when I really got my entrepreneurial itch. And as I'm reflecting now, I love that you mentioned that we all have that entrepreneurial gene. I think that as we grow up, we're either in an environment that cultivates it. And I think there's three types of people, right? There's the people and then pick it back up, which is what I feel like I am, and most entrepreneurs I think are in.
Yeah.
And then there's the people who are born with it, lose it, and never pick it back up. But I think we all are born with it. And it's something that creativity, and it's more than just a business, like being able to think bigger, to just be limitless in your terms of your vision and just have all these crazy ideas, because that's what all kids are. And essentially for one way or another, factor or another, life plays its part, and people come out and some stay entrepreneurs, some pick it back up, and some just never do. And that's not a good or bad thing. But as you said, we're all born with it, I think. And for me in college, my first entrepreneur thing was dropping out of college and getting into my real estate class to get my real estate license. So a big of mind you, on top of that, the whole world is super crazy at that time. And it's with the whole world being uncertain, the only thing I was certain of was myself. So I was like, man, I got to bet on me. Worst case scenario, when the life resumes, I could just go back. And because most people are just probably watching Netflix series and doing nothing with themselves anyways, I won't be behind at all because most people would just completely pause their life. So I love that you also got started at a similar time. So let me ask you, what was it like for you in your time getting started with that entrepreneur thing, itch in college? What was it like selling the t-shirts? What are some of the lessons you learned from that first endeavor where you put some money into it?
Oh man, it was crazy, right? So I graduated from the University of Michigan and I was in their business school. And so it was like the end of my time there. And we sold these things called Michigan Survivor t-shirts. And it had the class of, right? I won't say the class of because it's a long time ago with my gray hair, John. But and so we was like, hey, what a great way to sell t-shirts. So we sunk a few $1,000s in there and we're like, where we're going to line up is we sold them downtown right outside the bookstore. And I would just be up there say, get your Michigan Survivor t-shirts leading up to the graduation. Make your last purchase the best one, right? So just hawking them out there. And then when graduation day came out, it was in Chrysler Arena, large basketball arena. And we're like, we're setting up shop because we know all the parents will be standing outside waiting to get the best seats, captive for an hour. So we just unloaded all of our boxes, got all these t-shirts, and we're just like printing money, John. We're like, yeah, baby, boom, boom, boom. We're selling them. And all of a sudden, 2 cop cars pull up. And we're like, oh, that's not good. And they come walking up. And they're like, hey, can you show us your permit to be selling these t-shirts here on campus? And we're like, oh, no, man, we don't have our permit, man. So if we don't have that, it's like, well, hey, you can't sell here, right? We're like, oh, man, we're just going to be here another hour because graduation was done. They're like, no, we got to take your stuff and you got to go off campus. And so they load up our boxes in their scout car. And they're like, we're going to take you off campus. And we're like, oh, man. And this was amazing entrepreneurship, John. All of a sudden, the power of crowds, all the people up at Chrysler Arena saw the cops taking our shirts and they're like, give them the shirts, give them the shirts. Wanted to have the shirts come back because they were loving them so much, right? So it's just that type of entrepreneurship. So then, we had to sell them as people were driving in and, we ended up probably breaking even, making a little bit of money. But here's the deal, man. I hung on to a handful of them and I took them back to my class reunion and like, here you go, man. Let's get your Survivor t-shirts. So it's just that type of scenario. What lessons did I learn, man? Inventory management, read the fine print. Where can I sell stuff? Was it legal or not? The power of crowds, all of those things. And then pivoting in the middle, like, well, we can't sell them here. Where's the best spot that they're driving in? So just a great way to learn about entrepreneurship all in one little t-shirt business.
Yeah, that's amazing. And one of the lessons I was picking up while you were sharing your story is that going where the crowd is at, right? So many people try to go into an audience and sell it into something where no one's at, and they have this genius idea, but don't know if that's something that people actually want. And of course, people always buy graduation shirts. Like I graduated a little more recently, but it's still the same thing. Every class always is going to buy graduation t-shirts. It's without fail. And so you went exactly to where the people were, which is genius. And so now let me ask you, at what point in time, because I know you're a lawyer by trade, right? So At what point in time did you start shifting from that business to then making more of an impact on a broader scale and reaching out to more people and more entrepreneurs and helping out that? What was that transition like? And take us really back to that time, that point in time in your life while that was taking place.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Happy to do that. So you know what I call the power of crowds, John, before I answer your question is, I always like to say for entrepreneurs, it's about putting ourselves in the place of most potential. So what I'm always thinking about as an entrepreneur is, where is that space and place that's of most potential for me? So again, the power of crowds, where you go, what is that place of most potential? So just wanted to share that so people think about it. And they're like, when they're thinking about their entrepreneurial journey, which is, hey, what is my place of most potential that's going to create opportunity. So wanted to share that, and then I'll talk you through kind of where my, what I'll call my formal entrepreneurial career began. Went to law school right after my business school, and within 4 months of practicing law, I was like, man, I got to get out of here. I'm not going to be a great lawyer, but I'm going to be a really good entrepreneur. So I came up with what became a business I ran for 27 years. Reading the newspaper, Detroit Legal News. Again, I'm in Michigan. And I saw these enterprising female attorneys that were running kind of a temporary staffing agency. Someone couldn't show up to make a court appearance. They'd call these individuals, temp staffing agency. Lawyer shows up. They make it happen. I'm like, wow, that's a really neat idea. I don't want to be the person providing the service, but boy, I could create a staffing company out of that where I build a bunch of lawyers that want some additional work, got of the gig economy, Fiverr, all of that, but for lawyers, right? And this was, 25, 27 years ago. And then I said, wow, I just got to create the market, right? And I was working for a law firm. And so that became the genesis of what became a major part of my entrepreneurial journey, was just spotting an opportunity and then figuring out how could I scale it beyond just myself.
Yeah, so you said spotting the opportunity, and I want to ask you, because now you showed 2 stories about your entrepreneurial endeavors, and it's just like you have an eye for this, essentially, and it's just something a skill that not a lot of people have. So what helped you to get good at noticing opportunity? There's a quote I love. It talks about there's an opportunity in front of all of us, but the only reason we're not taking advantage of them is because we do not know. And so it's like, how do you get good at seeing those opportunities? Because for a lot of people, it would just either go under the radar or over their heads.
Yeah, John, for me, it's really having that incessant curiosity to say, why, what's going on, what's the need, and just constantly asking it. So for me in that moment, it was like, I'm working for a law firm. Yeah, just like any other industry, we would have spikes in work. Maybe we would need someone. Who's doing it? Wow, no one's doing it. And then I'm like, let me look to other cities that may have this, and started to see other cities that would have a similar company. I'm like, let me just start talking to people. Hey, if I delivered this service, would you buy it? Oh yeah, I would. Or here's the issues. I just started talking about the ideas. So for me, entrepreneurial generation is just incessant curiosity, and then taking action to begin to do something. I call it start by starting. It's you have the idea, you see that there's a market there, and then you just start talking to people about it. Like, hey, man, what if I did this? Oh, yeah, I do that. Well, what about that? And I begin to learn about what's going on. And I got this really cool visual that sometimes helps people connect with it. It's called the corridor of opportunity. So imagine this, longest corridor you've ever seen, and you kind of got this vision down there like, well, yeah, maybe I could do that type of business, right? What happens for most people that aren't entrepreneurs is they just stand outside that corridor, and fear keeps them from moving in and pursuing it, starting by starting, going for, chasing that idea. And here's what I say. I just say, enter that corridor. Because the minute I start talking about it, I start moving towards that vision of something I've spotted, I'm going to start looking down to the left. I'm going to look to the right. And invariably, there's hallways coming out of that corridor. And what do I see? I'm picking up more information. And then I'm just continuing to move down there. So it's that iterative curiosity, chasing a vision. And then you're able to say, yep, this is really going to be something. Let me double down, spend more time, throw some capital at it, and try to see if it'll happen.
Yeah, I love that, man. And I talk about a similar thing as well, and I kind of picked it up from Keller Williams, but I was still focusing on being a real estate agent. But we talk about it, it's called a GPS, right? And they have this whole one-page business plan, but then I kind of took it and spun off another idea from it. But when you're driving and you're using a GPS, and you don't put in the next turn ever, you just put in the final destination, and then the route calculates, right? The route calculates once you put the final destination in, and as you progress, then it'll tell you in 5 miles, get off at exit 3. And then after you get off at exit 3, then it'll tell you, hey, in 300 feet, take a right, right? And it's like, as you progress, like you're saying, then the doors, the turns, whatever you may be, whatever metaphor you decide to use, it starts to show up and it starts to appear. And it's something that I have figured out simply because I'm an action taker. Like, I'm more action oriented. So most of the time I don't really think before I do stuff, or for like to my own good or my own detriment. That's, its own separate issue. But it's like, I usually don't think about that stuff. And as I get myself into stuff, then it's like, oh my goodness, hey, there's this. Yeah. And then there's that. And like, similar to how we're being met, like I started guesting on podcasts, and then I got into getting on Jason's podcast, and then I got on Jason's podcast, and I got into his mastermind, and then I'm in his mastermind, then I got connected to you. It's just like, had these little steps of me not going forward had taken place, we would have never gotten connected. And that's just for like everything in life. You don't take that little step. So you're in this corridor and these doors start opening. Now, let me ask you, because this is where I got hammered last year, shiny object syndrome. Because sometimes it's not just one hallway you see. It's like you might see like 3 hallways, and you might see, a hallway and then another door, and you get into the corridor and realize that it's just like almost like a labyrinth in there.
Yes.
And with all the temptation to turn left and turn right, it's hard to stay on track. So it's like, how do you, and especially when you don't really know how to get there, right? Because we're beginner entrepreneurs. It's like everything looks like a good opportunity. So how do we stay focused while we're in that corridor? How do we stay focused? How do you stay intentional so that we're not running around trying to do everything?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I always break it down, John, in a couple ways. One is, in that first $1 million of revenue for any entrepreneurial enterprise, most people are just chasing revenue wherever they can get it. Then once they get to $1 million, they start to refine how they're spending their marketing dollars, right? So when we talk about shiny objects, for me, when I look at startup land for anything, we're going to probably be a little bit less discriminate on saying no to things. We're going to chase them, but I always say the one filter is, what's your vision? How does it lay out there? Keep those shiny objects within an industry, within some sales hypothesis. Don't be chasing, real estate and then baked goods and T-shirts and all these ideas. Try to keep it in an industry. It's okay to chase revenue to get money and cash flow, and then we start refining. Some people will say, hey, you got to nail your niche. You got to have it perfect. I'm always try things out in that first $1 million of revenue, generate it. Then you can start to say, what do I start saying no to? And where do I want to spend my marketing dollars to find those right opportunities coming in? Because now I've got all these experiences. So that's one of the things that I always look at. I have different filters based upon stages of entrepreneurship. And I think as entrepreneurs, we all try to see these amazing opportunities because we're constantly out there. But it is then starting to hone in after that first million to then go, what am I saying no to?
Yeah, no, I love that, man. And as we start to really segue into the main topic of the conversation today, and like entrepreneurship is something that, of course, we're all into. But one of the main core points that you talk about and bring home is vulnerability. So I kind of want to ask you to ease our way into this conversation. Like, where does vulnerability come into place with entrepreneurship? How do the two coincide?
Yeah, for me, here's what I found is people connect with people that are authentic, right? And when we think about entrepreneurs sometimes, right, you hear this fake it till you make it. You're putting on certain mask of here's how successful I am even before I'm there from a business standpoint. And what I've learned over the time is just let's be who we are. And the minute we can be vulnerable with who we are and what we're looking to do, the more we're able to connect with people. And to me, there still is that currency of connection. It's building that connection. And I think vulnerability is the pathway to connection. And when we as entrepreneurs connect with others, whether it's our employees, whether it's our customers, that's where the magic happens. So for me, it's creating that opportunity to be vulnerable to create those connections.
Yeah, and I love that. And I love that you mentioned too, the fake it till you make it thing, because I'm for me, one of my core values is like honesty and honor, right? Because honor and honesty kind of going one and the same. But it's like that fake it till you make it thing is literally telling people to put on a mask or a facade or this fake image of who they are. And that's also one of the reasons why, for me personally, like the trendy like affirmations, like I'm $1 million lead magnet or I'm a, whatever. And it's like, no, you're not. But if you're working on it, and it's like, I am working on it. Now that's a true statement. I am working towards being $1 million lead magnet. That is a true statement. And a lot of time with these affirmations, people that get in it and preach the affirmation from the top of the rooftop, it's like, I am this. And it's like, your brain knows. And of course, I'm pretty sure like with your reticular activating system and stuff like that.
Sure.
That your brain is literally meant to justify what you already believe. So if deep down you believe that you're not $1 million lead magnet, doesn't matter how many times you chant at the window or the mirror or whatever. It's like your brain knows, like, hey, you're BSing me, John. Like, keep it real with me. It's what you're telling me and what you're showing me aren't the same thing. So that's why I love that you mentioned the don't fake it till you make it, because I think that's BS advice, and a lot of young people are starting to adopt it, and it's like they don't understand, like, you can be who you are. You don't have to have that imposter syndrome, and you really have a chance to make it and succeed in entrepreneurship. So I wanted to kind of ask you, for me, I kind of picked it up naturally just from like my personality leading into entrepreneurship, almost in my own good. I'm like naively optimistic. So it's like, I'm always very, open and vulnerable and trustworthy, almost to my own, on my own detriment. But it's like, how does one adopt that mindset? Because especially when you come from very scarce beginnings, growing up inner city, growing up Section 8, all that stuff, it's like we're taught, at least for me, taught to keep my cards close to my chest, not to ask people for help, not to mention anything. Like my grandma, like ingrained in my head, John, when you're at a friend's house, don't ask for anything unless you're offered. And a lot of times, like a closed mouth doesn't get fed, so people can't help you if they don't know you need help. So it's like, how does one begin to like unwire and unpack that so they can be vulnerable and they can start, embracing who they truly are in entrepreneurship and not trying to put on this fake business mogul, hat on to try to network with people? Yeah.
A lot of great concepts there. I'll start with one. You talked about, optimism and the like. I coined a phrase called realistic positivity. So what I mean by that is I think successful individuals really understand, if you will, the brutal facts, the realistic facts. They confront them, but they confront them with optimism. And I think that's a distinguishing factor for some people that would be like, oh, I'm just so optimistic, it's all going to work out, but they're not really confronting the reality. And what I always call it then is realistic positivity. Understand the situation you're facing, understand that there may be some challenges, things you got to overcome, but you're going to do it with optimism. So that's kind of one thought process on the concept, that you talked about. And then when we think about, asking for help and vulnerability, I've been blessed to be a part of a group called the Entrepreneurs Organization, or known as EO. And there's about 16,000 members globally. And one of the tenets of EO, and when we get together, is this share from experience. It's known in this entrepreneurial mindset now, used to be known in this more formal language protocol called Gestalt protocol. And what that means is if you're in an environment of non-judgment, that's where the magic happens. So you're not telling people, here's what you should do, here's what you have to do. You're just opening up and saying, hey, here's what I'm facing. Here's the challenges. Here's how I'm feeling. And then the other individual, and saying, hey, John, you should do this, you should do that, just says, hey, John, in my experience, when I faced something similar, here's what I did. And it's that engagement protocol that really helps practice vulnerability, right? And it needs to be on a platform of trust and respect, right? And oftentimes just saying, I trust that you're not going to judge me and you're going to share from experience. And if we have those moments, that's where I have found I can get the most value out of it, because people are just sharing from experience. And then I take that input, I process it, and then I make my own decisions. And so I think that's the way that I learned how to really become more open and more vulnerable to say, here's my challenges. Did you face a similar situation? How did you overcome them?
Yeah, I love that, man, because things that Rich talks about, the masterminding and the mastermind principle, and how when two people get together, it creates this third mind. And from there, like thoughts and stuff like that, that normally would never come to mind or fruition if you just went about it alone, come into play. And a lot of times, like for me, while I was in my entrepreneurship journey, so I think I told you offline that I dropped out, or I think I said it while we were recording, I dropped out in the middle of the pandemic. And then I started working 70 hours on top of studying for a real estate exam. So I was at a point where like all the people that I normally would talk to, I never had the time to anymore for a little while. And for better or for worse, I think I probably would have, our relationships definitely would have altered a little bit, but it could definitely feel lonely as, you know, being a young person, you know, knowing everybody, and then you realize like, hey, not everyone's on this path. And as you know, this entrepreneurial journey, it's like, it's hard to find other people that understand you.
Yes.
Like from a place, not of empathy, but from a place of experience. Because everyone can be empathetic, but not everyone can truly understand from experience. It's like, it could be a little lonely when you don't know where to start. So, you know, for anyone that needs, you know, some piece of advice and they're looking to enter into this stage of life where they start kind of separating from the main crowd, from the masses, and try to get into this entrepreneurial track, what kind of advice can you give them so that they're prepared to head into it?
Yeah, I mean, my experience is just find a peer group, like you mentioned, right? So my peer group was the Entrepreneurs Organization, and that one is for companies generating greater than $1 million, but there's also an accelerator program, those between 250,000 and $1 million. And it's getting in with those that are pure peers. So if it's not a formal organization, it can be informal, right? Who are those peers that are on that same journey? And then it's connecting with them and sharing experiences. And I always like to call it catalytic learning, right? Where if I'm exposed to a topic and then I can go connect with another entrepreneur, that's where we really are able to go, how does it apply to me and what am I going to do with it? So I think every entrepreneur wants to be with their tribe. I mean, I remember the first time I was at the Entrepreneurs Organization, I came home to my wife, Lynn, and I said, I found my tribe. These people get me, right? This is awesome, because we had what I always like to call is this instant intimacy or instamacy, where we just connect because we're peers and we connect at a very deep, authentic level, and we help each other move forward. So to me, it's find that peer group wherever it is. For me, it was the Entrepreneurs Organization, but find it in a mastermind group or otherwise that allows you to connect with those peers, and then be vulnerable. Share your, what we like to call our top 5% and our bottom 5% that no one else we talk to about. But we have our peer group that we can share our biggest highs. Like, oh man, I just closed this great deal. And they're not going to be judging you or thinking, well, hey, it must be nice. They're going to celebrate with you. And then our deepest lows, when we're like, oh man, I'm facing this personally or with my family or in my business, they're there to say, hey, I've been there. Here's how we can help each other. So to me, it's critical. Have the peer group, creating an environment where you can be vulnerable, where you can share your highs and lows, and then get exposed to content collectively that you can catalyze amongst each other. And to me, those three things enhance the ability to be successful in whatever you're doing as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's amazing. It reminds me of this old African proverb that talks about if you want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go together. You want to reach these heights, the 7 figures and the 8 figures. It's something that I've been hearing as a constant theme throughout all these people I've been interviewing. It's like there's always some type of collaboration or partnership or networking or community involved, because as you said, it's like when you have those top 5% highs, you feel good. But when you have those top 5% lows and you look around and no one's there, those lows get real low like that. And part of the journey of entrepreneurship is like the peaks and the valleys are a lot higher and a lot lower than people who aren't in entrepreneurship. So the highs feel great, but the lows, man, it could suck. And if you don't have anyone there to help pick you up, it is hard. It is brutal to get through. And, you know, I had a similar experience when I found my first like mastermind group. I was like, oh my goodness. And I used to hate the quote that your strangers will support you more than friends and family. I was like, no, that's BS. No, there's not. Like, no, my boys are my boys. And not to say that they're not my boys, right? Not to say that they don't have my back, but it's like, once I got around some of these groups, man, I was just, I had no words. Like, I had to eat my own words, because it's like the level at which some of these people go out to support you, you would have thought they raised you, like, or you would have thought they were your sibling or something. Like, that's how they'll go all out, and then some, connect you with people, give you new opportunities, help you with your business and like the problems you're going through and the bottlenecks. And then they'll also connect you with other people who can help you. And it's like, man, these mastermind groups are like worth their weight in gold. And a lot of the times you mentioned too, about like how going with these people, like you can share and work and progress, and the journey. So you mentioned too, like $1 million marks and $250 to $1 million mark. And it's marks that I said most people that have never can really even fathom making that much money. So let me ask you, because I know this journey takes a while, and so some people that may be quicker than others, of course. But how does one gain the patience to withstand the journey, however long it may take? Because I'm pretty sure when you were selling T-shirts at graduation, you didn't have a clue that this is where your life would have taken you. So it's like, how does one see that journey? Because I mean, it's so hard to see past a couple years when you're this young.
For sure. I mean, well, what I always looked at right there, John, was just, balancing what I always like to say, harmonizing patience with perseverance, right? And knowing when to, lean into either one. And so it's interesting when I look back at, when I was in my 20s thinking about entrepreneurship, I had a conviction that entrepreneurship was going to be my life and where I wanted to be. But I didn't know for sure if my initial business that I founded was going to be the one, right? And to me, it's always thinking about understanding, is this the business, assessing the marketplace, et cetera. I knew that entrepreneurship was where I was going to spend my time, but I didn't know exactly how it would display itself. So for me, it's just, let's continue to drive things forward, pursuing entrepreneurship with the constant conviction that this is the space that I'm going to be the most creative and where I'm meant to be as being an entrepreneur. And then just persevering and going, I've got belief. I'm going to be ensuring that I've got it. I understand where my vision's taking me and that I'm actively going after it. But it's not linear, right? I mean, that's, I think sometimes the misnomer, John, that I've experienced is, when you build a business plan, and say you're pitching a bank or an investor on it, and you project going out, what most times do we see? It's this linear upward trajectory, right? Here's where I'm going over the next 5 years. It's nice and linear. And I go, that's the biggest disservice we do, is that investors and banks want to see this. And that's what we're said, business school or otherwise tells us we got to do. But that's never the journey. So it's squaring the fact that it's going to be up, down, but I'm going to eventually get where I need to go, kind of like your GPS, right? And I think where most people struggle is in entrepreneurship is it's not linear, and they're thinking linearly, but they need to say, whoa, I'm going to be able to navigate and get where I want to go. It just may not be a direct route, and just constantly believing you're going to get there.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that, right? Because like, if you zoom out enough, there's, I think, a video I seen, and if you zoom out long enough, and let's say you become this giant, like, galacto being, where like you're just a massive person and you could just rub your finger over the surface of the earth, even with all the mountains and Mount Everest, it will feel as smooth as a marble, they say, if you're big enough. So if you zoom out enough, it's like all the peaks and valley, like all those mean nothing, because at the end of the day, you'll end up, it's like more of a hockey stick than anything. But there's a lot of, a lot of this and up and down in the middle. But as you said, it's zooming out. And I think for me personally, I think having a philosophical mindset, it really helps out with entrepreneurship, because it helps to kind of detach from all of the highs and the lows. And especially is important with the lows, because they could really like deter you like emotionally and mentally because they can get to you. But it's like zooming out and being able to shift the perspective at least for me personally, has been able to help me out a lot with this journey. Let me ask you, what mindset / like paradigm shifts did you have to make to kind of just be able to withstand it all? Like, how did this come about? For me, it was like a lot of random philosophical videos that I've watched on YouTube just in my own personal time that just happened to come into play. Like, what were some of the things that kind of you gained inspiration from that weren't necessarily like practical business things, but that helped you along in your business journey?
So for me, I'm just an avid learner, right? So I love, reading, listening, consuming stuff. So I always like to just go out there and consume good quotes, sometimes spiritual stuff. Just go out there and read and always be on the lookout and have that stuff front and center for me. So what I always think about, John, is particularly in today's environment, how do we separate the noise from the news? And I'm going to use news not in the way that we think about fake news or whatever, but what's really important, right? So a lot of times for me, it's getting rid of the noise so that what's really important to me will be present to me and putting that stuff in front of me. So it's really being conscious about what output, inputs am I allowing to come into my field of vision, and how much time am I putting into it? It's being very intentional about that. Whether it's, reading quotes, whether it's a certain YouTube channel, whether it's a certain feed, whatever it is, find what gives you that energy, that inspiration, and dig into it. And then for me, it was always like wanting to learn things outside of my normal scenarios. When I think of social media today and algorithms, right, it feeds into things that we already know, and it just keeps giving us more of the same. So one of the things I love to do in a mindset is look outside those and just get other inputs and go, wow, I want to learn that and explore that, try something new, because that's what gives me the juice and I figure out certain things. So it's noise from what's important, not getting stuck in an algorithm that just feeds us certain stuff, but then still being creative outside of it to see other streams that we might not see. So that's kind of how I go about, getting the inspiration I need, the focus I need to just keep going after the entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, I love that, especially as I said, in today's day and age where like everyone is just like glued to their devices all the time. So I really love that you brought that home. And so Dave, where could we connect with you? Where could we find you at if we wanted to learn more about what you have going on and just continue to hear more about what you do?
Yeah. So Facebook and LinkedIn, at Dave Galbenski. So check me out there. I'm not a big Twitter guy right now, but Facebook and LinkedIn are where it's at. And I have a foundation right now that I'm spending a lot of time, which we didn't talk about, John, which was I'm a living liver transplant recipient. My brother-in-law saved my life. So I've got a family foundation called livingliver.org. So do a ton of stuff there. So if people want to connect as well, just reach out. Happy to chat as well and continue the dialogue, because I'm all about paying this beautiful journey of entrepreneurship forward, and love these types of conversations, John, and love what you're doing, man. Keep it going. I love your energy. I love how you approach entrepreneurship, and you're a rock star. Just keep it going.
Thank you so much, Dave. And now it's time for a little bit of a plot twist. We have our famous 5 questions. Throwing some curveballs at you.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'm not going to throw anything too wild. The question number 1, what is the most impactful lesson you've learned in life?
Yeah. So the most impactful lesson I learned in life, lots of them, is connecting with mentors that are 10 to 15 years further down the road, because it's inspirational enough, but I'm close enough to them to be able to go, I can see where I can be in that next decade and a half. So that was a lesson I learned out there, and it really, continues to serve me. And now as I get to the stage of being on sometimes more the mentor side, we're always playing mentor-mentee, it's finding those entrepreneurs that are 10, 15 years that I can be that close to them and help them move along. So that would be the impactful lesson that I would share with other entrepreneurs.
What is the most admirable trait a person can have.
Yeah, authenticity. Be who you are. And say who you are, be who you are. Follow up, trust, just be authentic.
If you had to change someone's life with one book, which book would you recommend?
I'll go spiritual on you. The Bible.
I loved it. What is the legacy that you're trying to leave behind?
So here's how I view legacy, John. Legacy is the cumulative impact of every now moment I have. So my legacy is I hope I brought the best version of myself to as many moments as possible. And if I do that, lots of cool things will happen because I don't get to define my legacy. All I can do is show up every day, be present, be in the moment. And whatever I do with those moments is going to be my legacy.
I love that answer. And it's probably one of my favorite answers I've ever heard. And the final question is, for anyone that wants to embark on their walk to wealth today, what is the first step you recommend they take?
Yeah, I mean, to me, walk to wealth really is about identifying your passion and vision and start by starting. Take that first step. You got to be clear. What am I passionate about? Where am I going? And that's when you have the best opportunity to create wealth and impact along the way.
Amazing. Dave, I genuinely enjoyed our conversation. I love some of the topics that we got to cover today and just really just dive deep into. So thanks again for just sharing your wisdom, sharing your experience with us, and just being vulnerable with us to share your journey. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, John. Really enjoyed it, man. Thanks for having me on.